Hey guys, this is Chantal, and today I wanted to talk to you about 5 different ways that you can use to preserve your onion tips. That's right, onion tips are not just there for decorations. You don't have to leave them on your onions for the whole time. You actually can harvest them often throughout the growing season, and it is actually better for the onion if you harvest them throughout the growing season because it helps the onions grow bigger. I've noticed as I harvest and from the onions to just kind of cook with them, I noticed that the ones that I harvest from, they grow much larger, and the ones that I haven't harvested any from yet, they are still a little bit smaller. So you want to harvest those green tips to encourage your onions to grow bigger heads. And today I'm going to be sharing with you 5 different ways on how you can preserve them, those onion tips. You can preserve them so that you can use them throughout the year. But first, let me show you how you can harvest the onion tips so that you don't damage your onions and you actually help it. As you notice on the onions that I already have harvested the tips off, you can see that I have left, so this is the neck right here, and over the neck I left about 5 inches of green growth, and you want to leave about 4 to 6 inches of green growth so that the onion can still photosynthesize and store up that energy into the bulb. You don't want to take all its energy producing capacity away from it because it will die, and especially if you damage the neck over here, then you are going to introduce water and bugs to enter into the neck, and the onion life would be decreased dramatically. Again, you can see it over here, and now I'm going to do the same for the rest of this bed. I have 4 onion beds that I'm going to be doing that to, so I better hurry up because it's past 5, it's probably 6 o'clock right now, and I need to hurry up and so that I can show you how to preserve them. I accidentally pulled one. Oh well. So this is what I got from just these 2 beds over here, from this one and that one. And look at some of these onions, how big they are. I mean, look, this is my hand. This is the red onions. These are supposed to be small onions, but a lot of them are this way. Some are not big, of course. Some are on the smaller side, but I'll still be able to use them. And over here also, we have a similar situation. Some are small and some are big, and you notice the ones that are big, they have bigger necks and more leaves on them, and the leaves are also an indication of how many layers the onions have. So the more you cut them, the more leaves they make, and the larger the onions would be. Like this one over here, for example, you can see, because I was cutting the leaves off of it, it continued to make more leaves and the onion continued to thicken. Now some of this onion variety, I noticed, this is my first time planting it, and I noticed that they split in the middle, so they're sort of a shallot. They grow like a shallot, and they have their insides split, and you end up with 2 necks. You can see a distinction, and let me show you one that is, like, you can see it clearly on this one. You have this neck over here and that neck over here. mean, this one I think even has 3 necks. Yep, 1, 2, 3. While these onions over here, which are the yellow sweet Spanish onions, no matter how much I cut them, they just have 1 neck, and it's going straight up the length of the neck. It's all connected. So now I'm going to take these onions inside and process them and show you what to do with them. I hope I can show you all the methods. If not, I'll tell you what you can do with them. And maybe I'll show you in a different video, because I still have 2 more beds that I didn't cut the tips off yet. And one bed doesn't have good onions in it, so I'm not sure how much I will be getting from it. But the other bed has some potential to it. So we'll see. We'll sort of play it by ear. These are the onions in comparison to me. That's a lot of onions. Before I go inside, I also want to talk about another reason of why I think these onions, some of them are bigger than others and some of them are super small. Other than just cutting the tips of the onions, onions require a lot of water. And I have an irrigation system in my vegetable garden that I set up early this spring, and I have a video on that also. I'll be linking it at the end of this video. However, because I used soaker hoses instead of the drip tube, because they were cheaper, I believe that the soaker hoses are problematic. They don't wick water as they should. They start out great and they wick out the water everywhere, and then as the season progresses, because they are exposed to sun, and even sometimes one of them I noticed, well, even when I first put it, it wasn't operating like I wanted it to. It was sort of wicking water in some places and not wicking it in other places. So I think that the reason why some of these onions are small is because they are not receiving enough water because of the soaker hoses. So next season I'm going to change all these soaker hoses, God willing, into drip tubes instead of soaker hoses, because I noticed that the drip tubes have a great amount of coverage, and I have them in my new vegetable garden area, which I will show you in just a second. These are the drip tubes I'm talking about over here, minus the weeds. But look at the vegetables in these beds. I planted these 2 beds with potatoes a couple weeks ago, and this area is starting to sprout, and I have a video on also how you can plant potatoes and have them perform great for you so that you can get big tubers. You can check that out. I'll probably link it in the description box below. But look at these vegetables. And you can still see the water. I watered this morning for 1 hour, while in the other section, granted, the compost that I have over there is really bad, and it's not really compost, and it dries out super fast, but the ground should still be more moist than I saw as I was pulling some weeds, and it wasn't as moist as I would like it to. So again, next year, lesson learned, next year I will be changing into drip tubes like these ones over here, and then my garden would be doing better, I hope, God willing. So let's go inside now and get these onions processed. My husband's bees come and drink water from here because the water seems to collect in this area, and they sort of get angry at me every time I come here. Well, we'll have to learn how to share without them stinging me. I just finished washing all the onions, and look, and this is just from 2 beds. So even if my onion harvest is not going to be great this year, which I'm not sure, honestly, I didn't stand there looking at the onions and counting them, which ones are big and which ones are small. But still, even if I don't get a huge harvest, this right here is going to be wonderful, because it's going to add a lot of flavor to my food throughout the winter. Especially the way how I'm going to be showing you how to preserve it. Before we proceed on talking about the methods that you can use to preserve your onions, your green onion tips, first I want to talk a little bit about what you do with them. The first thing you want to do is remove any tips that are blemished, of course. So these tips are all, we're going to be cutting off the tips off of them, or off of the ones that are bad. And also if there are any that are dried or yellowed, I'm going to be removing these as well. And I also have this large bowl with me here. And after we do that, what I'm going to be doing is chopping up all the onions. I'm going to chop them about 1/4 to 1/2 inch, depending on the application that I want to use them with. So right now, let's go ahead and clean up the first set that I'm going to be chopping. I have a whole bunch with me here so that I don't have to keep getting up. And I'm just going to put the yellow parts and all these things over here, all the bad parts over here. I don't have a plate with me. I wish I do. And I'm just going to speed up this process. Now, all this preserving is not going to happen in just one day. It's going to take me two or 3 days because there is a lot, but I'm going to try to show all of these methods to you guys, and hopefully I can edit the video on time. We'll see. Also, you want to make sure you don't have any weeds in there, because I accidentally cut some grass in there that was growing in the bed with the onions. I try to keep my beds weeded, but recently I haven't been able to. And if you've been watching, you know all about it. This bunch is looking pretty good. I'm going to start chopping. Put these aside a little bit so that you guys can see better. And with this one, I'm going with these, I'm going to chop them pretty small, about 1/4 inch, without chopping my fingers. They smell so good. I need to save some green onions for me to use as fresh. Also, I shouldn't just use all of them to preserve. Although I do know I'm going to be getting more green onions after I cut them. But for now, just for me to use on a daily basis. Oh man, these are gonna make me cry. And they taste just like the scallions that you would expect, you know, with the ones that have, I mean, they look just like them, except they don't have the white part on the bottom. Alright, I'm going to transfer these into this bowl over here. And cut some more. So the first and my favorite method of preserving anything is freeze drying. And right here I have my freeze dryer tray. We have a medium size freeze dryer, and it's the Harvest Right freeze dryer. This is what I'm going to be doing with this batch over here. I have 4 trays. I'm going to be filling them and putting them in my freezer before I start the freeze drying process. Freeze drying has been used for ages. This is the way how they provided food for the astronauts, and also they provide food for the military this way as well. They provide them with other ways, of course, but this is one of the main ways they provide them. Freeze-dried food is light, and it can be easily rehydrated. It preserves the nutritional values of the things that you have freeze-dried, and it has a texture that is very similar to fresh produce. And you can also freeze-dry full meals, except for things that have high fat in them. I have freeze-dried meat, I freeze-dried fruits, I freeze-dried vegetables. I haven't freeze-dried full meals yet, but that's on my bucket list, and maybe I'll do it with you guys one day. But today, this is what I'm going to be doing. Well, I'm going to be preparing these and putting them in the freezer first before I put them in the freeze dryer. Now you can do freeze drying directly without freezing them first and putting them in the freeze dryer, And you can freeze them first and then put them in the freeze dryer. I prefer freezing the food first and then putting it in the freeze dryer. Just kind of saves up a little bit on the freeze drying time. The freeze dryer first drops down the temperature to -40, I think, degrees Fahrenheit, and then it freezes the food, dries the food, and it draws out all the moisture from the food, and that moisture is then ejected out of the freeze dryer through a tube. We have our freeze dryer in our basement because it's a little bit on the loud side. So let me now put these over here, and you want to put them in a thin layer. You don't want to make it thick, just because it makes it easier for the freeze dryer this way to freeze dry your food. I mean, the pans are not that thick anyways, but the more you put in here, the harder it is for the freeze dryer to freeze dry it all. I think this is enough for this pan. Now I'm going to fill the rest of the pans. I might have to chop up some onion tops, some more onion tops. If you guys are interested in getting a freeze dryer, I have an affiliate link with Harvest Right, and I can put it down in the description box below, and you guys can purchase your freeze dryer through that link. It's not going to cost you any more than it would have. It's just I get a little percentage off your purchase from Harvest Right as an affiliate with them. And honestly, I love freeze drying. I think it is the best and the easiest method of preserving food. It preserves the flavor and the texture and the nutritional values of the food. So I'm a huge advocate of freeze drying. It's a little bit costly. You can purchase either a small freeze dryer, a medium, or a large freeze dryer. But you know, if you are going to be using it for years and years, and you are someone who gardens, or not even gardens, if you just want to buy food from the farmer's market or from the store and preserve it yourself, or instead of making freezer meals, you make freeze-dried meals that would last for years and years and years if they were stored properly. This is a great way to have food stored in your pantry, and you can make easy meals this way and just grab them whenever you don't have the time to cook and just rehydrate them, or you know, you can just freeze dry all your produce that you get from your garden, and you would have almost fresh produce that would taste great. I used to buy my children these freeze-dried fruits back when they were little, and I personally loved them. They were my favorite, but I wouldn't eat them just because I want my children to eat them. But now I can make these things myself. I don't have to buy them from the store. And buying freeze-dried food that is pre-made already is super expensive, but when you make it yourself, it is so much cheaper. Yes, you're paying a lot for the freeze dry up front, but think about all the things that you can freeze dry and the amounts that you can freeze dry for the money that you purchased it with. I mean, that freeze dryer is going to stay with you for years and years and years, and you can preserve your food to last you. If preserved properly, your food can last you between 25 to 30 years if preserved properly. But I mean, who are we kidding? We're preserving it so that we can use it, right? Okay, so I'm going to have to chop up a little bit more onions so that I can finish this up and put them in the freezer. So while I'm chopping these onions, another method that you can preserve your onions with is by dehydrating. But personally, dehydrating onions is not my favorite because it changes the flavor drastically and the texture of the onions. I suppose that would be maybe okay to use in like if you make your own ranch dressing or something like that. But still, freeze-dried onions are going to be so much better. They are going to taste so much better and rehydrate so much better than any dehydrated onions or most foods. So freeze drying is my favorite method. But if you don't have a freeze dryer and you don't want to put the cost into a freeze dryer, then you could dehydrate your onions. I used to have a dehydrator. My dehydrator broke Then we ended up buying a freeze dryer. I eventually would like to buy a dehydrator. That's something that I would like to do in the future, because there are a lot of things that I would like to do, like for example fruit leathers and stuff like that for the kids, because I know they would enjoy them. But for now, I'm just enjoying our freeze dryer and feeling thankful for all the blessings that we have. The next method of preserving onions is by freezing them, and this is a super simple method, of course. You just want to make sure to remove most of the moisture off the onions like this. So I'll probably, the ones that I'm going to freeze, I'll probably just lay them out so that they could dry a little more after I chop them, and then I will put them into Ziploc bags and I will freeze them. I'll have to label them, of course, because it's so hard when you have so many green things in the freezer and you look and you're trying to figure out what is this. If you don't label your stuff, you are going to lose track of what is what. I mean, with onions it might be easy to tell, but if you just happen to cut them a little bit longer than I would have here, you might confuse them with some other green stuff. And with freezing onions, they are not going to last as freeze-dried food or dehydrated food, of course. They might last you between 6 months up to a year, and you want to use them quickly. But this is a great way if you don't have a dehydrator or if you don't have a freeze dryer. It's an easy and quick way to preserve your onions. And if you plan on purchasing a freeze dryer, again, don't forget to use my link. It's in the description box below. If you plan on purchasing a freeze dryer, then you would have your onions already pre-frozen, and once it arrives, you could just put your onions into your freeze dryer that are pre-chopped into the freeze drying trays, and then freeze dry them. Of course, you have to prep your freeze dryer before you do that. There's a whole thing on how to do that, but you know what I mean. So I'm not going to actually do a lot of onions in the freezer. I'm actually trying to use up all the stuff that I have in my freezer, so that I'm hoping one day I will be able to buy half a cow or even a quarter cow. I've never done that before, and that's something that I would like to do in the future. So we'll see how that goes. I think that's just with today's economy, it seems a lot more economical to me. I mean, even before today's economy, I think it's more economical, and you just kind of have, you don't have to go to the store and buy all the different cuts of meats. I mean, some of the cuts of meats are just so expensive, so I usually don't buy them unless it's for a special occasion or something like that. So by buying a whole cow, you would be saving money, because all the cuts of meats are all the different cuts of meats would be priced the same, and you would be paying for half the cow, not for the specialty cuts and all that stuff. So you could have all these things and not have to worry about it. So I have no experience with that whatsoever, but again, that's something that I would like to do in the future. And so that's why I don't want to put tons of onions in my freezer. I'm just going to do a little bit, especially that I'm going to be freeze drying some onions. These, I would use these the same way I would use the freeze dried onions. I'll use them in a lot of dishes, maybe not in salads. I probably can use freeze dried onions in salads, but onions that were in the freezer, I have a feeling that they wouldn't have the same a very pleasant texture if you would put them in salads and fresh food and such. So I think this amount that I have right here is plenty for the freezer. Alright, I'm going to grab a towel and put it over here so that these onions can dry a little bit more before I put them in a Ziploc bag. I just brought a few napkins, a few paper towels. I think that would work. Okay. The next method that I want to talk about on how you can preserve your green onion tips is by making onion pesto. The way how you make onion pesto would be the same way how you would make basil pesto or parsley pesto. Now, I'm not going to make a lot, and also I I just ordered a food processor couple days ago, and it arrived today, and I didn't wash it yet, so I'm just going to use my old food processor, which is going to be perfect because I actually don't want a lot of pesto, because my family is not a big fan of pesto pasta, and so I think that I'm just going to make a little bit of this, maybe just 1 jar, or 2 or 3. I like pesto, so I'm only going to make the amount that the food processor is going to allow me to make. Basically, the food processor has a 4-cup capacity, my old one, so I ordered one with 10-cup capacity, but I'm not going to use that for the pesto. I will be hopefully making that tonight. My husband just dropped off the kids at their grandparents, and he's coming back and with my little one, and I better hurry before she comes because she's gonna want to sleep and she's gonna want mama. So for the pesto and for really everything else that I'm gonna be making, I'm going to be chopping the onions pretty big because the food processor is going to do the rest of the job for me. I don't have to chop them super small. I will be leaving links for everything that I'm using over here and that I will be using to make all the things. If you guys are interested, you can check them all out. I think this should be good, this size, about 1 inch or 2. Not super fussy about it. Just gonna fly everywhere just to make it easier on the food processor. And while I'm chopping, I'm going to tell you about the last method. For the last method, I'm not actually going to be filming it in this video because I want to make a separate video for it, and that is fermenting. I love fermented food, all sorts of fermented food. There's a hair in my mouth. Okay, there we go. It's super high in nutrition. I mean, you're taking nutritious food already, which is onions. Onions are super good for you anyways, without anything. And then you add fermentation to it, and you are adding all sorts of goodness. You have probiotics, and you can add some prebiotics in there also. So it's amazing. It's wonderful for our gut health. I'm not a doctor. Ask your physician about that. But fermented food is just one of my favorite ways to preserve food. There are a lot of health benefits to it, and you can do your research on that, and you will quickly find out the benefit of fermented food. And I feel so much better when I eat fermented food. I make homemade yogurt, and I make fermented pickles and fermented turnips and fermented carrots and fermented everything and fermented onions. I will be making a separate video on that because I'm actually going to be making onion kimchi, green onion kimchi, and I'm going to be following the recipe of one of my favorite Korean cooks, and again, I'll be making a separate video on that. So you guys stay tuned so that you can check that video out. But for now, let's try to make this pesto and be done with it before my husband and my little one come. And for the pesto, you can either can it or freeze it. I'm going to freeze it because I don't like the idea of heating the oil, because I'm going to be using olive oil, and fresh olive oil has a lot of benefits, but once you heat it, it loses all those benefits and it actually becomes not so good for you. So I love olive oil. I use extra virgin olive oil in everything, but I like it fresh. I don't want to lose all that benefit and all that wonderful taste that it has, and especially with green stuff, they kind of tend to lose a bit of their flavor once you cook them. So that's why I'm going to be freezing the pesto instead of canning it. For the pesto, you are going to need either some pine nuts or walnuts, and what I have here is cashews because I ran out of walnuts and I don't have any pine nuts. And I think cashews, I don't know why people don't use them in pestos. I think they are great. They have a creamy texture and they have a sweetness to them. And I think they would add great flavor to pestos. I'm not sure why. I haven't seen anyone using cashews in their pestos, but I'm going to be using them. And these are roasted and salted cashews, so I don't have to roast them. That's one step I don't have to do. And when you are preserving food, the less that you have to do, the better it is, because it's a time-consuming process and it's a lot of physical labor. And I'm sitting down and I'm relaxed and I have my water over here and anything that I need. I'm in my kitchen. If I want to take a break, I can. But right now I have to hurry. Let me see how many cups I can fit, how many cups of onions I can fit in here along with the rest of the stuff, and then we'll figure out how much we're going to need of the other stuff. I'm gonna pack these a little bit because, all right, so we have one, okay, so I can fit 2 packed cups of onions into this 4-cup food processor. It's not actually 4 cups, it's 3.5 cups. I have here some Parmigiano Reggiano, and I'm going to be shredding it. I also have some Romano cheese if I need it, because I'm almost done on my Parmesan over here. And if you use good quality Parmesan, it's going to make your pesto a lot more flavorful, and it is more expensive, but I just use a little bit of it when I'm making pasta or whatever, just to, as a garnish to kind of flavor the food, or over chicken Parmesan. It just adds a lot of flavor, and it's a little more expensive, but it's worth it, I think. And I used to buy the Kraft stuff, and I still do, especially when the kids just kind of want to sprinkle the cheese, the Kraft pasta, the Kraft pre-shredded Parmesan cheese. And I still do sometimes, but I really love this. I think it's absolutely worth it. Personally, I think it would do me better if I'm dairy-free, but I have such a hard time getting away from cheese. I don't know about you, but I love cheese. Okay, so I'm going to be putting a packed cup of Parmesan cheese in here. I'm going to put a little more actually, because it's going to make it taste even better. And I'll try to write this recipe down for you guys and put it up on the blog. I don't know when that will happen, but that's what I'm hoping for, either before or after this video gets published. We'll see. We'll see what life throws at us. Okay, so that's good enough. I don't have lemons, but I do have lime, and so I'm just gonna grate a little bit of lime zest over here. Whoops. I keep lime in the house a lot more than I do lemons, because we like to make guacamole. The kids and I like to just eat them this way, and I also like to make drinks with them. I put them with some raspberry and some water. You can also add some honey to that and make kind of a raspberry limeade. I use frozen raspberries. They cool down the drink and they make it super delicious. I don't put honey in my drink because I prefer it to be sour. I also sometimes use some seltzer water with that, and it just adds that fizz, makes it extra special. Never put your finger this way on any grater. You're gonna be grating your finger. Never put it where the sharp blades are protruding. You want to go the opposite direction. Now I'm going to add, if you were adding pine nuts, you would add about a quarter to a third of a cup. I'm going to add half a cup because I'm adding cashews and they are a lot bigger, so there's a lot more space in between the nuts, and it's gonna make it more nutty and more flavorful. stuff that baby. I'm also going to add, sorry you guys can't see my face, but I'm in a hurry. Going to add some garlic. I'm adding 4 cloves of garlic. If you like more garlic, you can add more. I love garlic, but I don't want to make it overpowering in case if my kids want to try it. I mean, the onions are already overpowering, but make it a little bit less spicy for them. And I'm going to add some salt, and you can change the amount of salt to whatever you like. I'm gonna put about a 1/4 teaspoon. The cashews are a little bit salty, but they're not super salty, so they are going to add a bit of saltness. And the Parmesan cheese is also salty, so that's also going to add some saltness. And now I'm going to add the olive oil. I'm going to grab 1/2 cup of olive oil, and I'm going to add a little bit, not all of it. Now with this food processor, it's broken, so I have to keep holding it, and I'm going to turn it on, and it's super loud. Add a little more olive oil. So I used about 1/3 cup of olive oil, or maybe a tiny bit more. It's not quite 1/2 cup. There's a little bit left at the bottom. Let me taste it and see if it needs anything. Wow. This is so good. So good. I think I can add a little more onion tips, and then I can add this olive oil in there, maybe a tiny bit more salt. And I think I'm going to squeeze in some of this lime juice in there too. That would make it taste better. Okay, so I'm adding about 1 cup more of the onion tips. Oops, dropped one in there. So I have 3 cups of onion tips in here. And I'm going to add this olive oil, the lime, the juice of 1/2 lime. And that's kind of how I cook. So it's really hard for me to create recipes, even though I have tons of recipes on my website. But I'm forced to kind of measure everything that I do. But this is my favorite way of cooking. That's how I grew up. And I'm going to add a little more salt. I'm going to add about 1/8 teaspoon of salt. We're going to run this again. And I'm going to try this again. Let's see. So much better, and it tastes amazing. I think I'm going to be making this again. I'm going to put it into these canning jars, and I'm going to leave about 1 inch overhead so that when it does freeze and expands, it's not going to break the jar. There you go. I think I might make some pasta tomorrow. I might make some pasta tomorrow and use this pesto because it's so good. After making this, I'm thinking I want to make a little more. I might make a couple more jars of this, and then the rest I'm going to freeze dry and turn into kimchi. And I'm also going to label this over here, and put it in the freezer, and tomorrow I'll make some more. These onions over here that I already cut up and let dry are dry already, so I can now put them in this plastic bag over here and put them in the freezer. So I'm going to write what they are, and I'm going to write the date so that I know in the future what they are when I take them out of the freezer, and I know how long I can keep them in my freezer. Now I'm going to take all the air out so that they're less likely to get freezer burn. And this is a freezer bag. If you're not using freezer bags, you'll have to double bag it. I used to not use freezer bags in the past, and then what I discovered is that they rip pretty easily if anything that's heavy gets on top of them and starts scratching over. I also like to flatten them out before I put them in the freezer so that I can either stack them like this next to each other or lay them flat on top of each other, and this way you'll have more storage space in the freezer. And I do that with everything that I can, with meats and stuff like that, so I think it works great that way. So now I'm going to actually continue on chopping the rest of the green onions just the way how I chop the ones for the pesto. And tomorrow morning I'm going to get back to you guys, and we are going to be freeze drying the onions together. Tonight the onions are going in the freezer, and then tomorrow I'll show you how I freeze dry them. But for now I'm just gonna finish chopping up the onions, and I'll get back to you tomorrow. So I just turned on the freeze dryer. Sorry for the lighting. This is our basement, and sorry for the noises. Now I'm going to hit the start button over here, and I'm going to leave the drain valve open, and I'm going to choose pre-frozen because that's what I have. The food that I have is already pre-frozen, and now it is freezing the chamber over here and cooling it to 32 Fahrenheit. Once it cools, then it's going to notify me, and it's going to let me know that I need to put in the food in the chamber, and then we'll continue from there. This process can take between 15 to 30 minutes, or sometimes 40, depending. So right now it's telling me to load the food into the freeze dryer and close the drain valve. So I'm going to go grab the food, and you can see the chamber is cold. You see the fog on the inside, and the drain valve right now is open. Once I load the food, I'll close it and I'll hit continue.
A funny face? Mama, that's a funny face.
Where's the funny face?
Funny face.
No, baby, I have to put it in.
Why?
3 more trays to go. Last one. There we go. Let's close the door.
Where you put it
Okay, and
in
then,
there?
oh, my fingers are so frozen right now. I'm going to close the drain valve over here. There we go. It's closed. The door is closed over here. And now I'm going to hit continue. So it's continuing to freeze, and now it's going to do its thing. This is going to take about 24 to 36 hours to freeze dry all these green onions over here, and then I'll show you how to store them. So the freeze dryer is done. It's been done for a while, but I had it actually go for 10 plus hours overnight. I meant to wake up at around 5 and get everything out of it and put it away in the jars, but I had insomnia, so I wasn't able to sleep the whole night and ended up sleeping in late. So right now it's around 8. I'm gonna get them out and we're going to put them away. Process complete. open drain valve to vent. So that's what we're going to do. Now I'm going to open it. Now that it vented over there, I can open the door. There we go. Oh, whoops. Very crunchy. You guys hear them? So I better get them out of this room because this room gets humid. There they all are, and now I'm going to hit the defrost and let it defrost. So these are all dry. You can hear the crunch. And I have over here a couple of clean mason jars with their lids. These are used lids, but I'm not canning. I could use these and they'll be fine. I also have over here my vacuum sealer, and I have a tube connected to it, and this attachment that goes over the jars and vacuum seals them, and it basically sucks all the air out. I could also put silica gel in there if I want to. I don't have the packets right now. I have the ones that you would have to put into bags yourself, so I'm not going to use those. You could also use Mylar bags. If you do use Mylar bags, they would have a longer storage shelf. But then if you put them in Mylar bags, you want to put them in, after you store them into the Mylar bags, you want to store them in another container so that mice and stuff like that can't get at them, because the mice will create holes into the bag to try to get at your food. Alright, so now I have clean hands. I have this handy dandy funnel over here. My canning funnel's in the attic, so I gotta get that down. It's the canning season. You know what? I think I could just do this. This has a narrower opening than the canning funnels. It's a pain to use with large things like this. If you want to, you could also turn this into onion powder. I might turn some of it into onion powder, but for these, I'm going to just put them in here as they are. Maybe the next batch I will turn into onion powder. It will be milder in flavor than your regular onion powder. Okay, I'm going to leave this much space just from where the rim starts to the lid. I'm going to put the lid on. And I'm going to put this in. And there's a button here that I can press right next to the hose attachment. And I like to press it 2 or 3 times. I don't think it matters. 1 time I think should be enough, but I just like to do that just because it kind of makes me feel better, makes me feel like it's sealed. If you hear this noise and it never stops, that means that there's no seal that's being created and it's continuously sucking air. You don't want to put the rim on when you are sealing it. You just want the lid, not the rim. So I did that mistake when I first tried vacuum sealing these jars, and you can't actually vacuum seal with the rim. You have to vacuum seal without the rim, or you might have this rubber lip twisted or something like that. So just take it off, check for anything like that. There we go. And all I have to do is label them. I think I need 1 more jar. You want to make sure the lid is sitting right at the rim of the jar. Did I say rim earlier? I was talking about the band. You don't want to put the band on the jar. I mean, you can't take the rim off the jar. take this out without taking the tube out.
I think you can. That means you probably don't have a good seal.
Yeah. Yeah, always check your seals. If you can hold the jar like this without dropping it, that means you have a good seal. Just put your hand under it so that you don't break the jar. And I'm holding it with a lid. I'm going to use the blender to make some onion powder, and hopefully the next time I come to make a smoothie it won't taste like onions. Hopefully my daughter won't wake up right now. I'm just gonna pulse it. I think this is good enough. It doesn't have to be super fine. I'm just gonna let it sit a little bit. Oh, I see a couple that didn't turn into onion powder. It's okay. Here, I'll do it one more time. Yep, that worked. Okay, so I'm going to sit this a little bit, and oh, there's still one left. Oh well. We're just gonna, it's okay. Not a big deal. I'm gonna let this sit a little bit before I put it into here because there's a lot of powder and I don't want it to puff in my face and make me smell like onions forever. So I have two, one for the wide mouth and one for the narrow mouth. Now I'm going to use this on the narrow mouth. So we made freeze-dried onions, onion powder, frozen onions, onion pesto, and we also talked about making dehydrated onions, and also we are going to be making onion kimchi in the next video, so stay tuned for that. They're all popping. The jars are popping because I just took them out of the freezer. Anyways, they're making music. I will be leaving some videos for you guys over here so you can go ahead and check them out. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.